Right now, someone could walk into your home and take everything you own. I mean that literally. Think about the actual physics of your life for a second. The lock on your door is a piece of metal. A determined person defeats in about 90 seconds. Your car is glass and sheet aluminum. The money you're so worried about isn't even money. It's a number on a server you've never seen, in a building you couldn't find. Almost nothing you value is protected by anything solid. A stranger who wanted your laptop could simply take it. Most of them physically could. And yet, you walked outside today and nobody did. Not because a police officer was standing there. There wasn't one. There's almost never one. For the vast majority of the hours you're alive, the entire apparatus that supposedly protects you is nowhere near you. And still, you parked your car and walked away from it. You left your kid with a stranger called a teacher. You handed your card to a person behind a counter and trusted they'd give it back. You did 100 things today that only make sense if you're quietly certain that other people are going to behave. So here's the question I want to sit inside for the next half hour. What is that certainty? What is the invisible thing holding all of this together when almost nothing physical is? Philosophers have a name for it. They call it the social contract. And it might be the single most successful piece of technology our species ever built, precisely because you can't see it, can't touch it, and have never once read the terms, which is a strange thing to say about a contract. Because a contract, by definition, is something you agree to. You sign it, you read the fine print, or you pretend to, and then you sign. So let me ask you the question that's actually going to run this whole video. The one that gets sharper the longer you look at it. When did you sign this one? You didn't. Nobody ever handed you the social contract and asked for your signature. You were born into a country that already existed, with laws that were already written, run by people you never voted for because most of them were dead before you learned to read. You never agreed to any of it. And you obey it anyway, every day, almost perfectly. Hold on to how weird that is. Because by the end of this video, I'm going to show you something worse. I'm going to show you that this morning, probably before you'd finished your coffee, you were handed a second social contract, a real one this time, a document with actual words, and you agreed to it. You pressed a button that said, "I agree," and you didn't read a single line. Let's figure out how we got here. And to do that, we have to run an experiment that's impossible to run. Here's the impossible experiment. Take away the government. All of it. No police, no courts, no laws, no state. Just people. What happens? You can't actually test this. You can't find a clean laboratory version of humanity with the state surgically removed, because there's no such place left on Earth. Even the most remote village sits inside some nation's borders. So this experiment can only ever happen in one place, inside your head, as a thought experiment. Political philosophers gave that thought experiment a name. They call it the state of nature. Picture human beings with all the scaffolding of civilization stripped away. No government, no property deeds, no police, no shared rules. And then ask, what are we underneath all that? Are we naturally peaceful and the state is a cage? Or are we naturally dangerous and the state is the only thing standing between us and each other? Your answer to that question decides everything. It decides what you think a government is for. It decides whether you see the state as your protector or your jailer. And this is the part that matters for later. It decides how you feel about who gets to make the rules you never agreed to. For most of Western history, though, nobody even asked the question this way, because the ancient answer was simpler, and it went unchallenged for almost 2,000 years. Plato looked at the city and saw something natural, an organism that arises because no single human can meet all their own needs. You need a farmer, a builder, a soldier, a leader. The state, for Plato, wasn't imposed on human life from outside. It grew out of it, the way a body grows organs. And it existed to make you better, to shape the soul, to pull people toward justice. His student Aristotle went further and gave us the line that echoed for millennia. Man, he said, is by nature a political animal, a creature of the polis of the city. Not political like arguing about elections. Political like. A human being separated from a community isn't a free individual. It's a broken fragment. We'd become fully human only inside a shared life with others. So, for Aristotle, asking, why do we have a state, was almost like asking, why do we have language? It's just what we are. And for a very long time, that was the ceiling. The state is natural. The state is sacred. In most of human history, the laws that ruled the earth weren't seen as human decisions you could question. They were the will of God, handed down, not up for debate. Then, slowly, that ceiling cracked. And when it cracked, free men walked through the gap and asked a question so dangerous it's still detonating under our feet. What if the state isn't natural at all? What if we made it? The first of them had watched his entire country tear itself apart. And it shows. You cannot understand Thomas Hobbes without understanding that he wrote his masterpiece while England was drowning in blood. Civil war. Neighbors killing neighbors. A king who would eventually have his head cut off in public. Hobbes lived through the whole thing, and it burned a single conviction into him that never left. Order is not the natural state of human affairs. Order is a fragile, artificial, precious achievement, and the second it slips, we go straight back to cutting each other's throats. So when Hobbes runs the impossible experiment, when he imagines humanity with the state removed, he doesn't see a peaceful garden, he sees a nightmare. And this is where people get Hobbes wrong. So stay with me, he does not think this is because humans are evil. That's the lazy reading. Hobbes's argument is colder and much harder to escape than people are bad. His argument is that people are rational and afraid, and that's enough. Watch how the logic runs. Imagine there's no law. You have a little food stored for winter. I'm hungry and I'm at least as strong as you. Now, even if I'm a perfectly decent person, what's the smart move? If I wait, you might come take my food first. If I trust you, I might be dead by morning. In a world with no one to enforce anything, striking first isn't cruelty, it's caution. The safest thing to do is to hit the other person before they hit you, and the horror is that everyone can see this logic at the same time. So everyone becomes a threat to everyone, not out of hatred, but out of pure, rational fear. Hobbes gave this condition a name that has never been improved on, the war of all against all, and he described the life it produces in 5 words that are probably the most famous phrase in political philosophy. Life in that state, he said, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Notice there's no villain in this story. There's no evil king, no wicked mob. There's just fear multiplied by everyone forever. That's what makes it terrifying. You can't fix it by being a good person because your goodness doesn't make you safe. It makes you a target. So how do you escape? Hobbes says there's exactly one way out, and it requires a trade so total it should make you flinch. Every single person agrees, all at once, to hand over their freedom, their natural right to do whatever they want, to a single overwhelming power, a sovereign, not because they love the sovereign, because a sovereign strong enough to terrify everyone is the only thing that makes it safe to lower your fists. If we all know that the first person to steal will be crushed by something bigger than any of us, then only then, and only then, can we finally stop bracing to strike first. Hobbes gave that sovereign a name, and he took it from the Bible. He called it Leviathan, a sea monster, a thing of overwhelming and unarguable power. The state, for Hobbes, should be a monster. That's the whole point. It needs to be scarier than we are to each other, or it can't do its job. And this is why Hobbes ends up defending near absolute power, ideally a monarchy. Once you've handed your freedom to the sovereign, you don't get to take it back whenever you disagree. You can't have everyone renegotiating the deal every time they're annoyed, because then you're right back in the war. The trade has to be permanent or it's worthless. Now, I want you to feel how bleak this is, but also how logical. Hobbes isn't saying tyranny is good. He's saying tyranny is better than the war of all against all. And those are your only 2 options. Freedom and safety in his world are a seesaw. You cannot have both. And if you make him choose, he will choose safety every time, because he watched what happened to people who chose the other thing. It's a brutal picture. It's also, if you sit with it, disturbingly hard to argue against. So let me try to argue against it. Because there's a crack in Hobbes's foundation, and a Swiss watchmaker's son is about to drive a wedge straight into it. Here's the problem with Hobbes's terrifying state of nature. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Look again at the humans Hobbes puts in that empty, lawless world. They're competitive, they're status-obsessed, they're calculating risk, hoarding resources, worried about their reputation, planning for the future, suspicious of strangers. Now ask yourself, are those the traits of a natural human? Or are those the traits of a human who grew up inside a society, a person shaped by property, by competition, by centuries of learning to see other people as rivals? Because it looks an awful lot like Hobbes took a modern, civilized, anxious European, someone molded by his own violent society, stripped off their clothes and their laws, and then called what was left human nature. He smuggled the conclusion into the setup. He described a person made by society, dropped them into a world without society, and acted surprised when they behaved like a competitive maniac. What if that's not what we are underneath? What if all that fear and greed and status anxiety isn't the bedrock of human nature at all, but a disease we caught from civilization? That is exactly the door Jean-Jacques Rousseau kicks open, and on the other side of it is one of the most beautiful, dangerous, and trouble-making ideas in the history of thought. Rousseau opens his most famous book with a sentence that has been carved into revolutions ever since. Man, he writes, is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Sit with the two halves of that, born free, then everywhere in chains. Rousseau's entire philosophy is the space between those two states, the fall from one into the other. And his lifelong obsession was a single question: what put the chains on us? Because if we were born free, then somebody, at some point, did the chaining. Who? His answer starts by completely inverting Hobbes. When Rousseau runs the impossible experiment, humanity with the state removed, he doesn't see a war, he sees something almost gentle. Picture Rousseau's natural human, not a wolf, not a warrior, a solitary creature, wandering the forest with genuinely small needs: food, sleep, shelter under a tree. This person doesn't hoard, because there's nothing to hoard for and no winter economy to plan around. They don't compete for status, because there's no audience to perform for. They're not cruel, and they're not virtuous either, because in a world with no society, concepts like good and evil don't even exist yet. There's nobody to be good or evil to. And Rousseau adds one more thing, the thing Hobbes completely missed. He says the natural human has an instinct built in that Hobbes forgot entirely: pity, a raw, pre-rational reluctance to see another creature suffer. Before we can even reason, Rousseau says, we flinch at pain that isn't ours. That instinct, not fear, not calculation, is the real foundation of everything social. We don't need a monster to make us decent to each other. Under all the noise, there's already a thread of compassion holding us together. So if we started peaceful, if we started free, where did it all go wrong? Rousseau's answer is one sentence, and it's one of the most incendiary things anyone has ever written. I'll paraphrase it, because the original is public, and you should go read the real thing. The true founder of civil society, he says, was the first person who fenced off a piece of ground, declared "this is mine," and found people naive enough to believe him. That's it. That's the fall. Not sin, not a serpent, not a war. A fence. The invention of property. Because the moment one person could own a piece of the world split in two, those who had and those who didn't. And everything Hobbes thought was natural, the greed, the competition, the suspicion, the endless war for more, Rousseau says all of that was born right there at the fence. Inequality created the conflict. The conflict didn't come first and force us to build society. Society came first, invented property, and manufactured the conflict. Now, follow this to its devastating conclusion, because this is where Rousseau stops being a romantic and becomes a revolutionary. If the fence created inequality, and inequality created conflict, then what is the state, really? What's it for? Rousseau's answer: the state was a con, a trick played by the people who already had the property to protect it. Imagine you're rich in a world with no laws. You're terrified. Everyone poorer than you wants what you have, and there are far more of them. So you propose a deal that sounds noble. Let's all come together, make laws, create a government, protect everyone from violence. And the poor, exhausted and afraid, agree. But look at what those laws actually do. They freeze the situation in place. They make your ownership legal, permanent, sacred. You've just tricked the many into guarding the loot of the few, and you've made them feel like it was justice. If that idea sounds familiar, it should, because a young Karl Marx read Rousseau, took this exact insight, stripped the romance of it, and turned it into a theory that shook the entire 20th century, the state as an instrument of class power, a machine the owning class uses to protect its ownership. That whole tradition starts here, at Rousseau's fence. So now we have two men staring at the same empty forest, seeing opposite things. Hobbes sees monsters who need a monster to rule them. Rousseau sees free innocents who got conned into their own chains. You'd think that would make them enemies. And it does. But underneath the fight, they agreed on one thing, and that one thing is radioactive. Here's what Hobbes and Rousseau, for all their hatred of each other's conclusions, both believed. And it quietly demolished 2,000 years of Plato and Aristotle. They both agreed the state is not natural. For Aristotle, remember, the state grew out of human nature like a plant from a seed. Inevitable, organic, sacred. Hobbes and Rousseau both said no. The state is a machine, an artifact, something human beings built at a specific point out of a specific problem. Hobbes thought we built it out of fear. Rousseau thought we got tricked into building it out of property. But both agreed on the crucial word, built. And here's why that word is radioactive. Once you believe the state was built, that it's a human invention with a human purpose, then you can suddenly ask a question that was basically unthinkable for most of history. Is it working? You can't ask whether a sacred, God-given, natural order is working. It just is. You obey it. But a machine? A machine has a job, and if a machine isn't doing its job, you're allowed to look at it and say, this is broken. This should be different. Maybe I should change it. Every revolution, every constitution, every protest, every time a crowd stood in a square and said, the people who rule us have failed and must go, all of it runs on this one idea. The state is a tool that belongs to us, made for a purpose, and answerable for whether it delivers. But there's a piece still missing. Hobbes gave us the why we obey. Rousseau gave us the how we got conned. Neither one clearly answered the question that turns this from philosophy into gunpowder. If the state is a deal, and the deal goes bad, do you have the right to walk away? For that, we need the man the story usually skips. And he might matter more, right now, in your actual life, than either of the other two. John Locke doesn't get the terrifying monster like Hobbes, or the beautiful forest like Rousseau. He gets something less cinematic and far more consequential. He gets the fine print, and the fine print is where you live. Locke runs the impossible experiment too, and he lands somewhere between the other two. His state of nature isn't a war and isn't a paradise. It's just people, living under a moral law they can reason their way to, with natural rights that exist before any government shows up. Life, liberty, and property. For Locke, you don't get your rights from the state. You bring them with you. You had them already. So why build a state at all? Because in the state of nature, your rights exist, but they're fragile. There's no neutral judge when someone violates them, no shared referee, just you enforcing your own case, which gets ugly fast. So people agreed to set up a government for one job, and one job only, to protect the rights they already have. And now Locke says the thing that changes the world. The government holds its power in trust. It's not a master you surrendered to forever. That was Hobbes. It's more like an employee you hired for a specific task. The power is conditional. It's held on your behalf, and that means it can be revoked. Hold that word, revocable, because it's the whole game. For Hobbes, the deal was permanent and one-directional. You hand over your freedom and you don't get it back, because taking it back means war. For Locke, the deal has a clause. If the government stops protecting your rights, If it turns on you, becomes a threat instead of a shield, breaks the trust it was given, then the contract is void. Not "you should complain." Void. And when the deal is void, the people have the right to dissolve that government and build another. Do you hear what that is? That is the philosophical DNA of the right to revolution. That's the logic underneath the American Declaration of Independence, that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, and when they betray that trust, the governed can throw them out. Locke handed the world a receipt. He said, "This power was lent, and what's lent can be recalled." So let me lay out the three of them cleanly, because you're about to need all three at once. Hobbes, you obey the sovereign because the alternative is a war that kills you. The deal is permanent. Rousseau, watch the sovereign carefully because it might be a con protecting the powerful. The deal might be rigged. Locke, the sovereign holds its power on loan from you for a job. If it breaks the deal, you can take the power back. The deal is revocable. Three ideas: fear, suspicion, and the right to walk away. For 300 years, that framework has been about kings and parliaments and revolutions. Big, distant, historical things. Now I'm going to point it at the small glowing rectangle in your pocket, and I promise you it fits better than it has any right to. Everything we've talked about so far has one strange feature in common. The classic social contract is a story, a useful, powerful, world-shaping story, but a story. Nobody ever actually signed it. There's no document. There's no signature. It's a metaphor we use to explain why you obey a country you were simply born into. The whole time it's been invisible and unsigned, until about 20 years ago, when something new appeared that flicked that on its head. For the first time in human history, you started signing real social contracts, documents, with words in them. And you signed dozens of them, and you're bound by everyone. And you have read approximately none of them. I'm talking about terms of service. Think about what actually happened this morning if you're anything like most people. You woke up. Before you were fully conscious, you reached for the phone. You opened an app. And somewhere in your past, to use that app, you tapped a button that said, "I agree." You entered into a binding legal agreement, a genuine contract enforceable in real courts, governing your speech, your data, your identity, your disputes, and your behavior. It was thousands of words long. You read none of it, and the moment you tapped that button, you did something no citizen in Hobbes's or Rousseau's world could have imagined. You actually consented, in writing, to a sovereign, because that's what these platforms are. Look at them through Hobbes's eyes, and it's almost eerie. Remember the early internet? The wild years, anonymous, chaotic, no rules, everyone shouting into the void, scammers and trolls and mobs, the digital equivalent of Hobbes's war of all against all. It was a genuine state of nature, and it was often genuinely nasty. And what did we do? Exactly what Hobbes predicted. We got tired of the war. We begged for sovereigns to impose order. We handed ourselves over to a handful of enormous powers, the platforms, in exchange for a cleaner, safer, more usable space. We traded our freedom for order, just like the Leviathan story said we would. And now those platforms are Leviathans. Look at what they do. They make the rules, what you're allowed to say, post, sell, be. They enforce the rules with an invisible machinery of moderation you'll never see. They judge. A private justice system that can find you guilty, delete your words, and exile you from the town square, with no lawyer, no appeal you'd recognize as one, no court you can name. They are, functionally, a government. They just aren't the one on your passport. And for a lot of your waking life, their rules bind you more tightly than your actual countries do. Now bring in Rousseau, and it gets sharper. Remember his fence, the first person to wall off a piece of the world and say, "This is mine"? What do you think the last 20 years have been? A great enclosure. Except this time the thing being fenced off, claimed, and owned isn't land. It's you. Your attention. Your behavior. Your relationships. The data trail of your entire life. Someone put a fence around all of it, said this is mine now, and exactly as Rousseau warned, found billions of people naive enough or tired enough to click "I agree" and believe the deal was fair. And here's where Locke's ghost walks in and asks the question that should genuinely unsettle you. Locke said the deal is revocable. If the sovereign breaks the trust, you have the right to walk away, to dissolve it, to take your power back. That's the clause that makes the whole contract bearable. The exit. So, what is your right of exit from the platform Leviathan? Just delete your account. Sure, except the platform isn't a shop you can boycott. For an enormous number of people, it's where their work lives, where their friends are, where the public conversation happens, where the jobs get posted and the reputations get built. Leaving isn't quitting a service, it's exile from the modern commons. The town square is inside the walls now, so you have the strange, historically new condition that Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke never had to name because it couldn't exist in their world. You have consent without exit. You agreed, really agreed, in writing, in a way no citizen of a nation ever did. But the one thing Locke said made the deal legitimate. The ability to revoke it has quietly been engineered out. The sovereign can change the terms overnight, and does. And your only revolution is to unplug yourself from the place where modern life is happening. Consent that's real, and exit that's fake. That's the contract you signed this morning. Now, before you close the app in a rage and go live in the woods, I have to stop and be honest. Because there's a version of this argument that's cheap and I don't want to sell it to you. Let me tell you where I get off the train. Here's the thing I have to admit, and it complicates everything I just said. The anti-state, anti-sovereign, the whole system is a con story is seductive. Rousseau makes it sound beautiful. And there's real truth in it. The chains are real. The enclosure is real. The platform Leviathans really do rule you without your meaningful consent. I believe all of that. But I also can't ignore the other half of the ledger. Because the state, the same artificial, imposed, unsigned monster we've spent this whole video interrogating, is also the only reason you have any rights at all against people more powerful than you. Strip away the state, and you don't get Rousseau's gentle forest. Look anywhere the state has actually collapsed, not in a thought experiment, in reality, and you don't find peaceful, self-sufficient innocence. You find the strong taking whatever they want from the weak, because there's no longer a Leviathan big enough to stop them. Hobbes, for all his bleakness, was pointing at something true. The monster we built to rule us is also the thing standing between you and everyone, stronger than you, who'd like what you have. Your rights aren't natural facts floating in the air. They're promises. And a promise is only worth the power that enforces it. And Rousseau himself never actually solved his own problem. He tore down the con brilliantly. But when he tried to describe what should replace it, how you get people to live together freely, without dissolving back into either tyranny or chaos, his answer got vague and, frankly, a little frightening. Knowing your chains are unjust is not the same as knowing how to take them off without bringing the whole roof down. Nobody has fully cracked that. Not Rousseau, not the anarchists, not anyone. The platform critique cuts both ways too, and I'd be lying if I pretended otherwise. Yes, the platform is a Leviathan that rules you without consent, but for the person with no local community, the kid who fits nowhere in their physical town, the dissident living under a real tyranny with a real secret police, that same platform is sometimes the first place they were ever protected, ever heard, ever able to find the others, like them. The refugee, the whistleblower, the person the actual state wanted silenced. For them, the platform Leviathan isn't just a jailer, it's a shield the old sovereigns couldn't reach through. Both things are true at the same time. The same machine that fences you in can be the only thing that lets someone else finally speak. So I'm not going to hand you a villain. Hobbes isn't the villain. Neither is the state. Neither is the platform. What I'm handing you is the same uncomfortable seesaw Hobbes found 400 years ago. Freedom on one side, security on the other, except now it's running on a device you can't put down, under sovereigns you never elected, through a contract you actually signed. Which brings us back to the beginning, and to the one question I really want to leave you holding. We started with a puzzle. Nothing physical stops a stranger from taking your things. So what does? And the answer was an invisible contract you never signed. A story so powerful that billions of people obey it every day without ever having read a word, because it was old and unwritten and simply there when they arrived. But somewhere in the last 20 years, a second contract was laid down on top of the first one, and it's the mirror image of the old one in the most disorienting way. The classic social contract is a fiction you never signed but are completely bound by. The digital one is a real document you did sign, actually, provably, with a tap, and never read a line of. So which one has more of a claim on you? The invisible agreement nobody ever handed you, that you obey out of habit and fear and the simple fact of being born, or the fine print you clicked through this morning without a second's thought, to see a photo that governs more of your daily behavior than the laws of your own country? Both of them run your life. One you never agreed to, the other you agreed to without looking. And the oldest, sharpest question in all of political philosophy, the one Hobbes and Rousseau and Locke spent their lives circling, the question of who exactly gave these people the right to rule you, that question isn't sitting in a dusty book anymore. It's not about a king. It's sitting inside a pop-up you dismissed without reading, so you could get to the good part. Maybe it's worth reading the terms.